Hey, what's up guys and welcome back to askNK. This is our weekly rundown of events, updates, and beautiful stuff happening within the Blender community, Blender Foundation, and also Blender as an app. And this week we do have a whole lot of things that you guys would probably want to take a look at. Starting off, the folks at Blender Foundation have just released the annual report for Blender 2020. So just in case you want to read more about this, I'm going to put a link in the description where you can see some of the things that actually happened in 2020, you know, because Blender is open source, so everything is right here for you guys to see. And for those of you who like to read the message from the chairman, you can simply take a look at that, and you can also see a whole lot of things that actually has to do with Blender that occurred in 2020. So there's a lot of things that you guys may probably want to read in terms of the offices, the people in charge, the people working, the development team, the financing, and all that stuff. So, you know, just in case you're looking for stuff, maybe you're trying to see who and who played a huge role in the development of Blender in 2020, you can also see some of this. Of course, you would also read more about industry relations in terms of the companies that actually equipped it and also helped Blender get to where it is right now. And of course, we're talking about things like the CPU and GPU support from the folks at AMD, Intel, and also Nvidia. And of course we do have the USD, which is the investor scene description, which the folks at Tangent Lab and also Nvidia are helping to develop. And of course there's the Mixer add-on that Ubisoft developers have actually started working on, and they actually committed this into Blender in 2019, and the Alembic and Cycle thingy, which we've seen a couple of updates too. And for those who like to see other projects, there's also, you know, a conversation about other projects, things that deals with scripting for artists, Blender Today, Settlers, and more. Financing is also a very nice part that a lot of people are quite interested in, and you may want to see how much, you know, the folks at Blender Foundation made in 2019, 2020, and also read more about how this things was made and how it was dispensed and all that stuff. So if you like to see the numbers, you want to see who is downloading more from where and what platform Blender is being used more, of course you would see all of those reports are right here. So for sure, the Blender annual report for 2020 is extremely open, and for those who are interested in knowing more about these things, link to this is going to be in the description. That'll take you over to this PDF where you can read more about it. Now with that said, let's dive directly into Blender and talk about some updates. And yes, so most of you guys will probably be asking, what are the new updates that we have now, especially in 3.0? So with Blender 3.0, the alpha opened right here. There's a very nice update that deals with the UI. And one of the cool things with the UI right now is the UI join and close. So at this point, you can now join several panels together depending on what you're creating, and you can create as much as you want. So in previous versions of Blender, what you could do is if you just simply right click, or you know, you click from here and drag, what you can do is you can simply join one part to another. So you can actually join some parts that looks like this in terms of trying to join a part that looks like this, which doesn't really work. But now in Blender 3 Alpha, you can actually do that. So you can right click and actually go over to that part and you can join it, which splits the whole screen in a very interesting way. And for those who are also thinking about, can we also join this part to this other part? Yes, you can. So you can actually do that by right clicking, hitting the join button, and you can join that, and you can still do all the swapping thingy, which just simply makes a lot of sense. So this to me is a very cool thing to actually happen to Blender, and I do like the fact that at this point, once you click and drag, you can now preview what panel you'll be closing at a given time. So let's say we want to close this panel, we can click and get that there, and we can also do the same thing like so. So having these workspaces is awesome, but having this creative freedom where you can actually drag things around, you know, you can mix things however you want to mix them, and you can actually go crazy with it, just makes it even more fun to work with. So something else that looks pretty awesome right now is the fact that at this point, when you're working in Blender, you might be wondering, let's say you kind of worked on a project before and Blender simply crashes. Right now, there is a brand new section that deals with last session. So at this point, you can now capture your last session. And if you go over to File and go over to Recover, so the last project you're working on or the last session can now be loaded. So at this point, we'll go over to File, go over to Recover, you can see the last session right there. And we can say don't save, and this would load up the quit.blend file. So in this case, we do have this model which I was actually working on previously, and you can see it. And if you're wondering where does this file exist, this file actually exists right here. So for you to have access to this, all you need to do is go over to your Explorer and then type %temp and %, press the enter key, and you would see the quit.blend file, and this is the file that gets to be loaded whenever you're trying to reload your last session. And this is just, you know, it's just beautiful. So at any point Blender simply crashes, you can now reload your last session and continue from where you stopped, especially for those who already have the autosave option active. This is going to save you so much time. So with this said, let's talk about some other updates. So we do have a couple of updates for both Grease Pencil and also Geometry Node. So what we need is a brand new scene. So let's go ahead and grab one, and then we'll switch over to Geometry Node and take a look at some of the cool things that you can now do. So in the Geometry Node right now, we do have something known as attribute transfer. So what you can do is you can now transfer attributes from one object to another. And a very simple example about this is if you do have a simple cube, hit the new button and you come right here and type ATT_T. Okay, so you get to see the attribute transfer. We can lock that in, and we can also launch an obj info. All right, so we get an object info, and this object is definitely going to be Suzanne. And with this, we would connect the geometry over to the source, which simply means that Suzanne becomes the source geometry and our simple cube right here becomes the target object. So what happens with the attribute transfer? Now within the attribute transfer, you can do a couple of cool things. And one of the cool things that you can do with attribute transfers is you can transfer a given attribute from one object to another. Now we do have things known as domain and also mapping, and you can select from a long range of these things and you can use them. But we're simply going to keep this one as automatic and then take a look at a simple example. So one example that we can look at is within the source, we can click on this button and we can see a couple of attributes that we already have. Now, if you do have things like a custom attribute, you can of course use this one, but we're simply going to stick with the simple ones that we have. What we want is we want to transfer the position, all right, of what we have with Suzanne over to the cube. So we can click right here and go over to position, and then click right over here and go over to position. So we're transferring the position that we have from the source object, which is Suzanne, over to the destination or the target object, which is the cube. So to actually even make this more interesting, what we can do right here is we can throw in a subdivision and we can subdivide this. Now you don't really see anything because we don't have the order done properly. So if we move this all the way up, you can start seeing that. So if we go ahead and subdivide this even more, you can start seeing that, you know, we're beginning to transfer the position in terms of points for what we have right here, which actually makes a lot of sense. So for those who are kind of interested in reading more about attributes, you can simply go over to this link. I'm going to put this link in the description, and you can see a couple of user feedbacks and see what, you know, some folks are talking about, and you can also follow up with the conversation about the Geometry Node. And while we talk about the things that you might want to see in Geometry Node and also read up, there is actually a tiny tease about things that they're currently testing for the Geometry Node, and this has to do with the new curve support. So this one is currently not available in Blender 3.0 at this point, but you know, hopefully this might be something that we will be seeing. And while we are looking at the things that we might be seeing with the new Geometry Node, there is also a very tiny question that was asked within the comment sections in one of those videos, which I think it is pretty cool to talk about. So this deals with the switch node. So the last time we talked about the switch node, so I'm just going to go ahead and delete this and actually delete this other one, connect this back to this one, click right here, delete that. And also let's actually go ahead and delete this one, click right here and turn this off. All right, so let's talk about that switch node. So the question that was asked is, can you drive the switch node with a color ramp? And yes, you can. So if I type in the word color and get a color ramp right here, and we go over and get a simple switch node and connect that right over there. I think that was a wrong connection, so let's just set this to geometry and connect this first one over to that section, connect this second one over here. We can now use the color. All right, so we can now grab the color and use the color to drive the switch. So at this point, you don't get to see anything because the output is not connected to the geometry. So at this point, if we go over to where we have as a factor, we can now set this back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and you can see some good results. Actually, you can even, expose this a little bit by clicking on this factor, connecting it right over here, and then you can do all of these things from here. Now, I don't know why anyone would need this, but of course, this is it's there, and anyone who is asking about this, there you go. This is how you can get this one working. And when we talk about things that you can get to work, these things can be used for some sort of MoGraph stuff, all right? You can also combine what we have with with the attribute transfer to do some very nice motion graphic stuff. And of course, there's a very tiny update for those who are working with volumes, as volumes right now actually supports geometry node. So if you already have a volume, so let's take a look at an empty. If you have a volume, if you click right here, you can now use the geometry node alongside with your volume. And this is I think this is going to be useful for those who would actually do simulation on a different app, export that as a VDB, or maybe you have your VDBs and you want to drive geometries directly on top of this by simply using node. This is also going to be very, very, very useful. So with this said, let's dive over and talk about some nicer and cooler stuff coming to the grease pencil. So within the grease pencil right now, there's a couple of updates. Okay, so yeah, you can now convert your text to grease pencils, and this is beautiful. So let's take a look at what we can do. So by default, if you go in and you throw in a simple text, so let's grab that text and let's actually make sure that this spells the word Blender. All right, so we have this here. So with this going on, let's press the tab key. By default, what you could do before is if you right click, you can only convert to curves, mesh, and also point cloud. But right now you can convert this to grease pencil. And once you convert it to grease pencil, it even makes a lot of sense, because now, like I said earlier, for those who are working with motion graphics, or for those who like to use Blender to create motion graphics, you can actually do even way more stuff with this right now. So what do I mean? This is just one of the things that you can do, which is converting text to grease pencil, but then you can now pick up any grease pencil, stuff that you've made before, something like this. You can pick up anything, you can go over to where you have your modifier, and previously we talked about the noise modifier and all that crazy stuff that you can do with it. Right now you can even do something even more crazier. So if you go over to the thickness section, right now the grease pencil now has a thickness and opacity fall off control, which is cool, because at this point, if you hit on the uniform, you can set a uniform thickness. You can go over to where you have as the fading option, and you can select an object to be more like an influencing object that would make the fading happen. So this is more towards those who are into motion graphic stuff. So in this case, we're going to go over to where we have our empty and load up a simple sphere as the empty, and this is going to be more like our influencing object. So if I select this object, which is our grease pencil, go over to the object section on the fading and select empty, we can now select this empty and drive a couple of things. So at this point you might notice, so let's actually bring this one all the way back. So at this point you might notice that we're having something, it's a little, very little, you don't really see it that much, right? Okay, so let me explain something to you guys. If you have this selected, right within this place is the fading start. So once it's set to 0, nothing happens. The more amount you set here is the fading which you would get at the end, which is being influenced by this object. So the end factor, on the other hand, deals with how much thickness or how much fall off you'll be getting at the end. So to make this even more interesting to understand, if I pick this object from here and I move this towards this part, you would notice what we are getting. Okay, now at this point it doesn't really make so much sense. You'd be like, okay, it's the same thing. No, it's not the same, because if you go down here and you set this to 0.1 for example, and then we go over, let's pick this one up and we start moving this, you would also notice we're getting something. Now this still doesn't make a lot of sense until we set this to 0.001 and press the enter key, and then once we start moving this, all right, so once we start moving this a little bit further, you would now notice that we're getting even more fall off. So to actually make this even more interesting for you guys is, if I set this to the default value of, let's say let's actually set this to 0.1 and I click out, you notice what we get. If I actually dial this down, so let's dial it down, you would notice that we're getting that fall off. So you can punch this all the way down to a given point. So let's actually make this maybe let's bring this a little bit lower to a point like that, and then play with the end. So the more or the lower the end you have, that deals with how much thickness you'll be getting at the end of your object, while the other hand, this deals with how much fading you'll be getting. Okay, I don't know if that makes sense, but that is what it is. So at this point you can now use this to control a lot of things. So this is just one. Now the fading feature doesn't just exist for thickness alone, the fading feature also exists for opacity. So in this case, if you pick up an opacity and you simply want to have that fading thing, you can also do that. So we can close that, and we can go over to the opacity. So let's turn this all the way off, and we can select our empty and use that empty to also drive the opacity of what we have. So at this point, these, can drive that. Of course, you probably wouldn't see that because we already went ahead to turn this one off. So let's also play with the opacity. Actually, let's turn this one off. All right. And then let's have a uniform opacity for this, and let's see what we can get. So at this point, you may notice that it simply disappears. Let me zoom in a little bit. So yeah, you may notice that it simply disappears, and this makes sense. I kind of think that maybe there should be some sort of fall off feature that should exist for this one, as this works for both the thickness and also the opacity. And in most cases, I will simply just use the thickness compared to just working with the opacity, since with the thickness I can actually get that same opaque kind of feeling, or that same opaque feature, which I'm currently looking forward to getting with the opacity modifier. So these are some of the very cool things that you can now get with the grease pencil. And speaking about things that you can get with a grease pencil, if you also go over, there's also a glow effects and threshold value color mode for grease pencil. There's an offset which actually adds a random offset option for those who like to play with these things, and as well there's an add layer and material to blank objects. Meanwhile, there is also a very nice thumbnail orientation change, which is a very tiny update that deals with how thumbnails are going to be displayed in Blender, and you can see more about that right here. So just in case you're wondering, this is what it would be looking like right now compared to this. So just in case you see these thumbnails within the asset browser, this is what it will be looking like. And speaking about the asset browser, there is also a pretty cool update towards the asset browser right now. So for the asset browser, there is an initial prototype for snapping plane, and just in case you're trying to position things within your viewport coming from the asset browser, right now you can use contents of your asset browser to position things properly, and they actually snap to one another. Now, I actually tried out with the very default version of Blender which we have, but that is something that is currently not working, and I think because this is still set to unpublished, so it is still something that the folks at Blender Foundation are currently testing. And for anyone who would like to try these things out, once this is out, I'm probably going to make an announcement for that, so you can do well to try it out. So there's a couple of teasers that are here, so just in case this makes it to the final version of 3.0, this is definitely going to be awesome. Pretty cool stuff that we have this week. And with that said, let's talk about some things that you guys would want to see within the community. Right now within the community, there's a couple of plugins, add-ons, stuff that you guys may want to take a look at. And the very first one is the PrintNodes. So how many times have you really wanted to get high quality screenshots of your node tree, and you find that is something that you cannot really get? Now the creator Yetus Blender have made this possible by creating a simple add-on that can actually help you capture your node tree in high definition. So if you also go over to this page, you would notice that it has a couple of things for free. So for those who are looking for procedural brushed metals, maybe you're looking for the image pasting stuff, the node pie, you're looking for the print nodes, this is for free. You can grab it and you can start using it. And speaking about things that you can grab for free, there is also the Node Relax Blender add-on, which is also a very cool one. So just in case you want to brush around your nodes, yep, you can now use this Node Relax add-on to sort of brush around, relax your nodes, calm their nerves down and get some good result. And actually we would also go ahead and talk about something that you guys probably don't know happened. So the creator of the grid modeler has now moved his add-on, not really moved, but he has now added his add-on to the Blender market. So just in case you had a hard time purchasing this previously when we did talk about it when it was available for Gumroad, right now on the Blender market you can actually grab it. So this is also a very cool and a nice add-on for those who like to create hard surface stuff. We've covered a video about it in the channel, so just in case you're wondering, I'm going to put links to that in the description so you can check it out, and also check out this add-on. And with that said, there's also a free add-on as well that you can get, and this is called BlendFarm. It is an open source cross-platform standalone network renderer for Blender. So in case you have about 3, 4, 5, 6 PCs hanging around, or maybe you have like 2 or 3 different laptops hanging around, you can now create your own very simple to use render farm across a network within your home. So this is an add-on that takes advantage of the computers that you have hanging around and simply uses all of their processing power and all of the energy that they can generate together to render your stuff. So this is a pretty cool one, and for anyone who would like to take a look at this, I'm gonna put a link in the description so you can do well to check it out. And this is more like it. Tell me what you guys think about this one in the comment section. We've kind of covered a whole lot of things today. For those who are looking for free stuff, you can go over to Yetools Blender Tools, get these things for free. You can also get the Node Relax, and you might want to also check out the Grid Modeler. And of course, for those who would like to read more about the Blender Foundation annual report, link to all of this is going to be in the description, so do well to check these things out. Tell me what you guys think about this one in the comment section, and of course, if you like this video or you learned something from this, you can go ahead and give it a like, and don't forget to share with a friend. And if you're new here, it's going to be amazing for you to hit the subscribe button and also turn on notifications so that you don't miss the next video or the next update. And until I see you guys again with a tutorial update, Free Friday, Tutorial Tuesday, tips and tricks, things like this. Peace.